Hello everyone and welcome to an all-new episode of Palace Off the Top Rope presents 90's Films Turn 30. Thank you so much for joining me, ladies and gentlemen. And we kicked off Season 2 last week with Sleeping with the Enemy starring Julia Roberts. You can listen to that now on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, or however you get your podcast these days. I've done my absolute best to try to provide this podcast on many different platforms, so there you go. You have multiple avenues on trying to get it, so have at it. And this week we're going to be going with a bunch of these week after week after week until I catch up again. We are celebrating the 30-year anniversary of the year 1991, so of course I'll be going through a chunk of 1991 movies from earlier this past year because we're about to head into June, and there's a couple of movies that had their 30-year date earlier in the year, but of course we're still all around just celebrating 30 years in general of this year, so it's okay to still talk about these movies. So I started off late last week, and I'm just going to keep doing these one after another until we match up with the actual anniversary dates with these certain movies that are being celebrated this year. So I promise to get those out on their anniversary dates once I catch up. This week we are tackling The Doors starring Val Kilmer, which is, I believe, the first biopic I'm going to be covering in this series, so it's going to be it was an interesting rewatch. I remember seeing it once years ago, but I don't really remember much about it. It was from director Oliver Stone, and spoilers for you guys, this will be the first of two movies of his we'll be covering on this show, specifically for this season. It'll actually be in the season finale coming up way later this year, and that'll be JFK. So I saw that on the list, and I was like, wow, two Oliver Stone movies in the same year. And this director was really known for doing a bunch of biopics, but kind of giving his own spin on it. And for the most part, a lot of his stuff was very controversial. So they weren't necessarily like box office hits, but they were in the consciousness as far as like getting the conversation going. And, oh, did this really happen? Or did he fabricate this? Or, you know, Oliver Stone was a really controversial director back in his day, specifically in the 90s. He hasn't really done so much lately, but, you know, throughout the 90s, he delivered a lot of powerhouse biopics with big movie stars. And again, 90s are my favorite decade, just because of star power and the rise of giant blockbusters and, you know, and all that stuff, all headlined, of course, by movie stars. So, and Val Kilmer's in this one, leads this one, which he was, you know, a big movie star back in his day. So nowadays it's kind of like whatever, but, you know, back in his day, Val Kilmer was a pretty well-known actor. So, we'll be talking about that. And, yeah, let's get into it. Oliver Stone, this is the first of two movies on the 90's Films Turn 30 series. This is The Doors. Enjoy the show.
Is everybody in?
Is everybody in? The ceremony is about to begin.
Robbie Krieger, guitar player.
John Densmore, percussionist, 22 years old. Far out.
Pamela Morrison, ornament.
Raymond Daniel Manzarek, 1-2-12-39, musician.
Name, occupation?
Jim.
You know the day destroys the night. Night divides the
Sides are
day.
being chosen. The planet is screaming for change, Morrison. We gotta make the myths.
You need to say the first shaman invented sex.
Break on through to the other.
They call him the one who makes you crazy.
I'm the Lizard King. I can do anything.
Jim Morrison, the god of rock.
The guys at Network have told us that they have a little problem with the lyric, girl, we couldn't get much higher. They asked if you could say instead, girl, we can't get much better. Can you dig that?
Girl, we couldn't get much higher.
I love it when you sing to me.
I'm the poet and you're my muse.
Do you hear them out there? It's you they want now.
Love me, be untrue. You know
You ever tried drinking blood?
Mr. Morrison, you've gone too far.
You're a poet, not a rock star.
What you gonna do for Act 3?
Go on, kill me. Come on, give me some death.
Let's just say I was testing the bounds of reality.
All right, here we go. The Doors, starring Val Kilmer, Meg Ryan, Kyle MacLachlan, Michael Madsen, Kevin Dillon from Entourage fame, those of you that are Entourage fans listening to this show, Kathleen Quinlan, bunch of nice supporting actors here, or nice character actors that you've seen in so many different movies, so it was a joy to watch them. Directed by Oliver Stone, as I mentioned at the beginning of this show. This movie premiered in movie theaters on March 1st, 1991. Let's take a look at the synopsis here for this movie, which is given to us by BoxOfficeMojo.com, which is powered by IMDb Pro, which is a website or app that I love to use, where you can check out, cast listings for every movie, trivia, goofs, bloopers, soundtracks, anything that you've ever wanted to know about a movie. I've mentioned this plenty of times on this show, and I'm going to say it again. There's times where I'm watching a movie and I'm like, gosh, that person, who is that? They look so familiar. Their name is on the tip of my tongue, and let me look it up on IMDb Pro, and bam, there it is. And I'm like, of course, I should have known that. So yeah, I love to use that. And of course, I love to use BoxOfficeMojo.com to check out all the box office numbers. I'm obsessed with all that stuff. There's so many different avenues you can go on this website. So if you've ever wanted to know the success or non-success of a movie, box office-wise, this is the perfect website for you. Anyways, here's the synopsis. The story of the famous and influential 1960s rock band The Doors and its lead singer and composer Jim Morrison, from his days as a UCLA film student in Los Angeles to his untimely death in Paris, France, at the age of 27 in 1971. Now that's... on the surface, this looks like a pretty straight-up biopic, right? But as I mentioned before, Oliver Stone likes to give kind of like a wild, edgy, kind of like almost hipsterish take on things. So with that, the movie's a little bit different in some sorts. It doesn't play like a traditional biopic, and I'll get to that in just a second. But with, doing different things like that, non-traditional things as far as like a movie goes, and being a little bit weird with it, there wasn't much success at the box office. So this opened on March 1st, 1991, as I mentioned. It wasn't number one at the box office. It landed at number 2. It lost to The Silence of the Lambs, which, to no fault of its own, that movie actually went to end up winning Best Picture next year at the Academy Awards. So, it had heavy competition. But anyways, it opened up to $9 million, which is not bad for a 90s movie. But the fact remains is that it actually ends up going to only gross $34 million domestically, which means it died out pretty quickly, and a lot of people really weren't interested in it. And this movie really gained like a cult status throughout the years, and I noticed that through growing up in the 90s and the rise of home video, and eventually in the latter part of the 90s DVD. I remember seeing this movie getting like multiple different releases and collector's editions and all that stuff. So this movie became popular, or not. I mean, I don't want to say like super, super popular, but it gained a following more after its release in theaters. Because again, the movie's a little bit different. So, and it's a little weird. And again, I'm going to cover that in just a bit. But yeah, $34 million domestically. And I was trying to get a budget for this movie, and I'm pretty sure it was high, because there's a lot of, concert like filmed like events, and there's like a lot of extras, and I'm sure they paid good money to get Val Kilmer and a lot of the supporting cast that's here. It's a pretty nice casted movie, which is kind of the norm for an Oliver Stone movie. He's usually good at getting good cast and big name actors. So, like I said, this movie's 2 hours and 20 minutes. And I know I've mentioned, earlier in previous episodes, and more specifically just now at the age that I'm at, it's like, if I see a movie that's over 2.5 hours or, the 2 hours and 15 minute mark, I'm like, oh gosh, this better be worth my time. I think movies, for the most part, are too long these days. There's a lot that I've seen where it's like, man, you could have trimmed so much out of it. But with a movie like this, obviously it's a biopic. You know what you're getting into. Okay, it's probably going to cover a lot of ground. But for me, it wasn't so much like the story. It was more of the actors in it, and sometimes that can be the driving thing, which was the case last week with Sleeping with the Enemy, where like the movie was like so-so, but Julia Roberts is so electric in it, and she's so like dynamic, and she pops out on the screen that was, an easy watch, even though it was a short movie. But again, the same thing happened for me with The Doors, where I was so captivated by all the actors on screen and the characters that they were playing, and just that I liked a chunk of the actors that are in the movie. So that made it an easy 2 hour and 20 watch for me. So yeah, not much to report on the box office of it all. I mean, I would consider it, again, a failure. 34 million. I mean, I would have to look at the budget, but I would say it was somewhere close to like 20 million, I want to say. So that's not good from a studio standpoint. But again, this movie did gain a cult following, and I'm sure it made a lot of its money on home video sales and DVD sales and soundtrack sales, which I'm sure, because of course the music of The Doors is very, very apparent throughout the movie. It's played throughout it, which makes the movie, again, a much more enjoyable experience than it should be, just because of how dark the story is that a lot of the music is present in it. And, The Doors music is very iconic, and it's still used to this day. You think about any movie that's set in like Vegas, or if it's a heist or something, they always play Break On Through to the Other Side as the trailer music. Like, it's still to this day, it's used. I think more recently, not that the movie's like too close, but I remember a movie called 21 with Kevin Spacey. I know we're not supposed to talk about him anymore, but yeah, I remember the song for The Doors being on the trailer, and The Doors has been featured in, a lot of classic movies and a lot of throughout the years and different movie soundtracks. So their music has developed a cult following, but it's also like still been very relevant in terms of like it being used in pop culture. So that has a lasting effect, and I'm sure that's helped the case for the movie. But yeah, 34 million total box office. We can move off of that, and now we can talk about the critical reception of the movie. And on this series, of course, talking all 90s movies, right? Who were the main two critics that everybody paid attention to, and the ones that got the most attention and the most markings on posters and DVD artworks and VHS artwork? Like, it was Siskel and Ebert. If you got a 2 thumbs up from them, like, you would see it plastered on a poster on the front, not even on the back. They would get front cover. So they were a big deal in the 90s. And it's been fun to look back on YouTube. You can search Siskel and Ebert, and you can pretty much type any movie, basically from the 90s and probably early 2000s. I forgot when Gene Siskel passed away. I know Ebert passed away as well, but it wasn't until a long time later. You can find most of these 90s movies there on YouTube and them reviewing it face to face. And I love the way they review movies, because it's not so much as cynical as it is today. Like, it's a lot of black and white now, whereas with Siskel and Ebert, and I'm not saying they're the only ones, but to me, like, they were the most standoutish and mainstream, is that they can say negative things about the movie, but not in a way where it's like trashing it. And it feels like today with critics, it's like when they say something's bad, like, they'll go out of the way to just bury it. Whereas these guys will give a reason or say, oh, this is what they could have done better. They have like this really neat conversation. Even if it's only for a few minutes, it's more engaging than like a 3-page article from some blogger on who knows what on twitter.com that's just trashing a movie and not really like giving really analysis on it, or being too just, what's the word I'm looking for? Too pretentious on it. Just be straight up. And I like Siskel and Ebert. They're very, their analysis is not even so like, it doesn't have to be the most articulate of words and all that stuff. It's just simple things, And on this movie, which was weird because it starts off with Roger Ebert, and he's talking about, and he's glowing about Val Kilmer's performance, which I agree with. I'm not sure if he got nominated for the Oscars. Again, I should have done more research, but this is not really more about whether it was Oscar nominated or not. It's just more about the movie in general. But he glows about Val Kilmer's performance, about the music and the way it was shot and all that. But then he goes on to not recommend the movie. He gives it a thumbs down. And that's basically just because of the darkness and the unpleasantness of the entire movie, which it is. And again, I'm going to get to that in just a second. But that's real weird because he's saying all these nice things, but he gives you a reason why not to recommend it and whatnot. And it's true, you know, it's a real dark movie. I don't know if it's, you know, it's a Friday night, you want to watch a movie like with your significant other, whatever, you're just having a date night, but inside or whatever. It's like, is that really the biopic you want to choose to watch? Like, the music's good, the performances are fine, but the story is like, geez, this guy was just it seems like a downward spiral from the get-go, and it's like there's not really anything happy about it other than the music. And Roger Ebert states that like the music's great, but the stories behind it or how they got made, it's just like, man, it's so depressing, and so that's why he gives it a thumb down. But again, it's staggering a little bit. So he's like on the fence about it. So like he says these good things about it, but then he gives you the big reason why ultimately it's a thumbs down. And again, see, it's not like so much black and white with him. It's a bit of give and take. So I love that analysis. There's good things about the movie. And again, same thing for me. There's things about it that I like, but ultimately, yes, I'm kind of more in agreement with Roger Ebert. Like, yeah, the story is a little dark and a little just depressing the whole time. And like, you don't come out of it feeling good. So that's his take on it. And as far as Siskel goes, he liked it. Again, said a lot of the same things, but he said it made him feel good or remembering that time. And Roger Ebert kind of goes at him like, what are you talking about? Like, this guy's like on drugs and all this stuff, exposing himself and all these other things in the movie. He's like, how could that, what are you talking about, a good time? He's like, well, no, I'm talking about the music and all that stuff. He's like, well, buy the soundtrack. He's like, wait a minute, why are we arguing here? Like, we both like the movie for all these different things. So I want to say, like, they still didn't really have like graphics and all that stuff, but I'm pretty sure Siskel's was a thumbs up, and Ebert, of course, and he mentioned it was a thumbs down, but there was no visual representation of it. And of course, you get more of that once we get later in the years with their show. But yeah, thumbs up from Gene Siskel and a thumbs down from Roger Ebert. But again, nice conversation back and forth about things that they liked and then things that they didn't like. But you know, it's not necessarily like all good, or all bad. Like, there's just all of these different things, and I love those conversations that those two have. So again, they will always be the focus of this show as it pertains to actual individual critical reception of the movie. Now let's turn our attention to Rotten Tomatoes, and again, this is a reference point because I want to see how the critics are responding and how the audience is responding in terms of percentage. And again, Rotten Tomatoes is not the be-all, end-all of looking how a movie is done. And again, always judge the movie for yourself. I always do the same. But it's a neat number to look at just to see how it's trending. So this movie scored a 57% with critics, and that's out of 61 reviews. And that's considered rotten, so it's got the little splat if you go on the website or if you have the app. Here's the consensus from the critics. Val Kilmer delivers a powerhouse performance as one of rock's most incendiary figures, but unfortunately, Oliver Stone is unable to shed much light on the circus surrounding the star. Again, much like Roger Ebert, I agree with this consensus here. It's pretty spot on. It's pretty how I felt about the movie, from beginning to end. Loved Val Kilmer's performance, but ultimately the movie, like as a biopic in terms of like the coverage of the story and all the details and all that, like it was a little out there and a little weird and a little like just, I don't know. I didn't really get to learn much. I feel like I didn't learn much as opposed to just like it turned into like this, like what's going on, kind of like a Twin Peaks type thing, which is interesting because Kyle MacLachlan is in this movie and he was writing the success of Twin Peaks at this time, or it was about to start. So, you know, it had kind of that little bit of a vibe in it. The audience score, however, out of 50,000 plus ratings on this website, has it at a 79%. Now, last week, I mentioned how that translated into box office for Julia Roberts in Sleeping with the Enemy. But I think the high score on this one, I'm attributing it to the fact that it gained that cult following status throughout the years. So I'm going to say I want to say it probably didn't start out high, but it grew. It has grown throughout the years, and that's why it's pretty high right now. So again, this is a very cult-like movie, and the only reason that it's probably still like in the mainstream is because Val Kilmer gave a really good performance in it. And that's where we can really start to turn our attention to as far as like things that I liked or things that I didn't like about the movie. And we'll start with the first one, and it's the one everyone's talking about or talked about in the reviews, and Siskel and Ebert mentioned it, is Val Kilmer is very convincing in the role of Jim Morrison. Even looks like him. You know, I went to go look at pictures of the Doors, Googled it, and then looked up video, and, you know, he got the mannerisms right. Didn't really look at voices as far as like talking. That may be the only thing I might have missed, but for the most part, I mean, he's pretty convincing in the role, and he kind of loses himself in it, where like when I'm watching it, I'm not like watching Val Kilmer play that character. It feels like I'm watching that character. So he does a really good job with that. Again, the supporting cast, I'm going to add it to that, is just a big part of it. Meg Ryan is a surprise here. She plays the girlfriend / wife, I think she ends up. Her name's Pamela. She's okay in it. You know, just your typical like groupie girlfriend. You know how they used to play these characters, and, you know, they're kind of just there, and they go through the ups and downs, and for better or worse, they stick with this, with their, you know, their man, even though in this movie, I'm like, gosh, why does she stick around? She knows this guy's like openly like cheating on her, or hooking up with other women, doing drugs with other women, you know, doing all these like really like mischievous things, and it's like she still sticks around with him. And I don't know, I don't get that part of it, but whatever, you know, if that's the real story, you know, more power to them. Maybe they had a special connection or whatever, but I found that relationship to be really weird, and in the movie it never really clicked with me, or never really like, man, I hope they end up together. But just because of all the other things that were going on in the movie. I mentioned Kathleen Quinlan is in this movie. She plays like a reporter, but also like someone who was into like witchcraft, or I don't know, voodoo, or I don't know. There's a lot of weird things in this movie because there's a lot of stuff that Jim Morrison was really into. Like, he was obsessed with death. He was a very poetic person. So like in the movie, he's speaking a lot in soliloquy, and, you know, just, you know, the meaning of everything has a meaning or not a meaning, you know, I kind of like that always throws me off. Like, not only in movies, but in real life, I've met people like that where like they question everything, and hey man, and, you know, what are we doing here? And just stuff like that just throws me off. Like, get over yourself. So that's the type of character, at least how it's portrayed in the movie. Is that Jim Morrison was, you know, into that poetry, you know, obsessed with death, did a lot of drugs, acid, like to do a bunch of like trippy stuff, alcohol, of course. And then, of course, where Oliver Stone gets kind of weird with it and, you know, does different things is that there's parts of the movie where like it turns into like this acid like dream state, and, you know, the movie changes from scene to scene, and you're like, again, it gets very Twin Peaksy, and you're like, what the hell's going on? This is like very weird, and this is kind of going on for a little bit. So I don't know if there's a little bit of Lynchian vibes there that Oliver Stone may have picked up from Twin Peaks or whatnot. So it's very, very odd at times, and I'm sure like as a casual moviegoer, you're like, well, I was looking for just a straight up biopic, and this kind of does that, but also like just spins off the rails for a little bit. But again, I think it's trying to really show you the perspective of the movie from Jim Morrison's eyes. But again, it's a very depressing story. And right from the get-go, the guy's like just very odd, and like just, you know, usually in movies about downfall, it usually starts like at a happy place, and then it just slowly descends into that. This was like, it was literally started like already like on a depressing note, and just kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And yeah, he builds up the band, and they have that camaraderie for a little bit, but that camaraderie doesn't last that long, and there's a lot of tension throughout the entire movie. And, you know, this guy Jim Morrison is just such a wild card. Like, you don't know if he's gonna like, you know, be sober enough for a show, or show up on time, or what is he gonna do? Like, and again, I know if that's the point of the character and how he was, then, you know, so be it. But just me watching as a movie, I'm like, man, like, what a really depressing story. Like, where's the bright light at the of all of this? and it just not being like the music. Of course, the music is the best part of it because that's the stuff that still lives with us today. But, you know, as a character and all the other people around him, like there was just nothing really that entertaining or, you know, nothing really fun to look at afterwards. Like once I was done with my rewatch, and for those of you that haven't seen it, it is available on HBO Max right now, so go check that out if you're subscribed to that. You can see it there. Yeah, once I got through with my rewatch, it was kind of like, man, I need to watch something like fun, like just it was just sad and like, yeah. And I get some stories are like that, but again, when you're making a motion picture, like in some part of it, you want to feel good, right? You want to escape, and I know that's what Jim Morrison was trying to do in the movie. A lot of it is escapism, but in a really non-traditional way in which you shouldn't do things. Yeah, I just left that movie feeling very like just not happy and like, why did I sit through this? But again, the actors are fine in it, and that's probably my biggest thing of what I liked about it. And don't get me wrong, I'm all in for like the weird shit. I'm like one of the weirdest guys you'll ever meet. Trust me, I'm random as shit. You follow me on Facebook, I'll post the most randomest like stuff that just doesn't make any sense, or if it's completely out of left field. I'm all for it. But here, when you start mixing it with the drugs and death and all these weird like witchcrafty stuff, that's where I'm like, nah. You know, even I have a limit, right? on my randomness and my weirdness and stuff like that. I'm like, I could do a little less of that. You know, 2 hours and 20 minutes of this was a little too much. I can watch the movie and fine. I'm not like offended by it or anything, but yeah, I don't need to see it again. It's good for a one-time watch if you want to see good performances. Like you want to see like an actor just go full on in the character. And Val Kilmer's just like one of those really good actors that really is underrated overall. And it's actually news came out this week that the A24 is going to produce a documentary on him. And I can't wait to watch that, which I think Amazon is going to distribute or something like that. That's going to be fun to see because this guy has really had a really nice career that nobody ever really talks about as far as like being one of the top ones, because he's done a lot of good movies. And again, this was just a notch on his belt. And again, if this movie were coming out like this year, he would for sure be like a shoo-in for like best actor. But I don't know back in 1991. Again, I would have to have done extensive research on that. But again, this is more just about the movie in general, and he does a really fantastic job. And if you take away anything from it other than the music, is the great performance by Val Kilmer. So we'll leave it at that. Another thing I liked about this movie was obviously the use of the music. The music is just very present, and I think they used all the original recordings, so I don't think Val Kilmer did any original like singing. Like I know they did that for stuff like Rocket Man, which came out a couple of years ago with Aaron Edgerton, which was he was doing it on Elton John, but he was doing the singing, and some other actors do that, like Joaquin Phoenix did the singing of some of the Johnny Cash songs. But I think this was all like Doors music because it literally all sounds exactly the way when you listen to the actual artist, album on Spotify or whatever. So I like the usage of it and the fact that it's so present throughout the movie, even when it's just the characters like roaming around and the songs are playing. It's not like something like Queen where they have one of the most ridiculous scenes in the movie, and I'm sure maybe it played out like that or not, but I think in the movie it just comes off super cheesy and whatnot, is when they're developing the song for Another One Bites the Dust, and it's literally during them fighting. They're arguing over something, and it leads to one of the actors like doing the beat for Another One Bites the Dust, and that's how they get the song. And I was like, man, that's so, if it happened that way, whatever, but it's so fucking cheesy the way it played in the movie. But here in the movie, like in the Doors, whenever stuff's going on and they're just playing like different songs of classic songs from the Doors, and it just blends in well with the movie. Again, there's a lot of bright spots, but in the end, like the movie's just But performances, music, and I'll even give Oliver Stone, even though he does like the weirdness of it, I mean, just directs a pretty decent enough movie. Not his best. Where would I rank it? He's done he's got a good filmography, but as far as like a rewatch of his, I probably put this one probably low on the list, just because of the subject matter. The performances are great, but the subject matter is just kind of a little too dark for me. Even though I can handle a lot, but am I going to rewatch this movie like 3 times, like within this year, the next couple of years? No. Could I watch this movie again, like years down the line? Yeah, sure. If somebody wanted to invite me to watch it, or, you know, if my next girlfriend or wife out there is a huge fan of The Doors, or she wants to watch it, and if it's one of her favorite movies, sure, I can sit through it. But me personally, as a pick for myself, I would never go down that road again. And those are just a couple of things. They're not really much to dive into there. What can we move on to next? All right. I didn't really look at recasting this because it's hard once they've nailed like the main singer, Jim Morrison, which they did with Val Kilmer. So it's like, I don't know, to do it again would kind of be like a downscale. The best example I saw was like, I think Ashton Kutcher did like Steve Jobs, and then like a couple of years later, or a year later, the Aaron Sorkin written movie came out, and that starred oh my gosh, what's his name? Why am I blanking? What's wrong with me? I'm good with this stuff. Michael Fassbender. He played Steve Jobs, and I thought he did a really, really amazing job. And it's like it really trumped what Ashton Kutcher did. But again, that's just my opinion. But Val Kilmer nailed it here with Jim Morrison, and to try to recast it, I think would just bring it down a notch. So I didn't really think about recasting this movie if they did it today. Plus, I don't think you could find a lot of good young actors now. I mean, I'm sorry, like the death of the movie star, man. Like I'm telling you, we're coming at a real weird time in Hollywood where the focus is now more on diversity than the actual like talent and building up of movie stars. It's all about the diversity, which I get, but it shouldn't be the only thing when making movies. Yeah, it'll be hard. Like the character actors that are in this movie in the supporting roles are all great. Like they're all like people that you know from different stuff, and not just like guys or girls that are there like just to fill up a role. So yeah, I would leave the recasting alone because Val Kilmer just nails it with Jim Morrison. Would this movie in 2021 be a theatrical experience? Would it get released in theaters, or would it be a streaming movie? Honestly, with the way things are going and the way everyone's shifting to television, they would make this into a series. They would make it a limited series. It would probably be on HBO Max, so they could get the most out of like being explicit with it, with the drugs and the nudity and all this. There's a lot of nudity and drugs in this movie. So HBO could go all wild with that. They would make it like a 10-episode limited series event, The Doors, and it would be this huge TV event that would be released week to week. And I think they would try with the cast, but I don't think it would be as top notch as the one that they got in 1991. But that's how I see it. It would definitely be a streamer. And again, this was back in 1991, and now we're in 2021, 30 years later. And the first 2 movies I've done would be now streaming as opposed to the theatrical release that they got. So think about it. Like last week, Sleeping with the Enemy, right? $130 million at gross, right? Like that's a huge hit. And in 2021, it would just be a movie on Netflix or whatever, and it wouldn't even get the chance to get that exposure, that buzz or anything like that. It would just be lost in a streamer and get added to somebody's list. Maybe a couple people see it here and there, but it doesn't get the buzz that it does. And even with The Doors, if you did it as a streamer, like maybe, yeah, you could get some buzz on it, but like not as much as a box office theatrical release. Even though this one didn't make money either back in 1991, but I think if you went the theatrical route this year, in the present day, you could market it better and really sell the music of it so that you could entice people to go watch. I mean, again, one of the big selling points of Bohemian Rhapsody was the music of Queen. That's what sold it, and it brought a resurgence to it. Yeah, people were interested in the story, but it was more about those iconic songs. And, I know Queen has more iconic music than The Doors, but The Doors is still pretty relevant. And there's a lot of people out there that do love their music, and, they developed a big following throughout the years. So yeah, I mean, it is possible that it could be a theatrical release in 2021, but I don't think the studios would risk it. And that's just the way things are trending. It's big movies, big IP, and not so much about the acting, the small scale, and character stories, But that's just the way I see it. Hopefully I'm wrong. I would love to be proven wrong, but, it's not trending in that direction. And lastly, does this movie age in the 30 years that it has existed in our pop culture zeitgeist? I'm going to say yes, because, like I said, the music is still very relevant, so you can always reference back to that, because you can hear that song in a trailer, and people will be like, who's that? And they're like, oh, and you Google it, or you ask a friend or whatever, and it's like The Doors. Oh, well, who are The Doors? You can Google them, and then you'd see like, oh, there's a movie on them, and then you can go back and check on it. And so it's got a nice lifespan there. As far as like the content in the movie, there's a lot of weird stuff in it, as far as like, with the drugs and, the treatment of women and stuff like that. So that stuff hasn't aged well in the 30 years. But again, if we do that, then we're going to do it with every single thing, and you can find flaws in everything. So it's not really worth it to do it. You have to think about it as a movie of its time, and a movie also like that is based in the 60s and 70s. So again, you're going back decades more. So yeah, of course, things were way different back then. So I don't think you can fault that as part of its aging 30 years. But as a movie in general, as a whole biopic, while it may not be one of the best ones out there in terms of the subject matter, it's still like, it's a watchable movie. Especially if you're someone like me who, again, enjoys movie stars, enjoys character actors, which I love. I love to death. I love spotting, like, more than, like, the main stars, which is, of course, why you turn into certain movies. But one of my favorite things is always spotting, like, oh, who are the supporting people? Who's in this movie? Like, and then you start to see, like, the names in the credits, and like, oh, man, I'm going to have a fun time spotting who this person's playing and whatnot. So that, for me, has aged finely. So I'm gonna give it an old Roger Ebert thumbs up as far as it aging nicely. And yeah, that's the Doors. It's not really the most in-depth analysis of it, but it's more of a movie. Again, if you're somebody that enjoys performances and acting, characters a little bit more than the story, this is probably a movie for you. But again, be forewarned, you're going to have like some of that weird, trippy stuff that happens in the movie that kind of like takes you out of it. But if you're in and you're okay with that, you'll have a fun 2-hour and 20-minute ride. And that's going to do it for this episode. Tune in next week when we return to the world of the Ninja Turtles with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, The Secret of the Ooze. And a little bit of a spoiler, I'm going to be bringing back a guest for that one. So stay tuned. That'll be coming next week on Palace Off the Top Rope presents 90's Films Turn 30. Again, thank you so much for joining me today. You can find this episode on Spotify. Search Palace Off the Top Rope. Hit that follow button. You can listen on podbean.com. I share my social media. I share it through my social media pages on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram through there from Podbean. You can download the app. Or if you're an Apple person, you have the iPhone, the iPad, all that stuff, subscribe on Apple Podcasts for me, folks. Leave me that 5-star review. I would greatly appreciate it. Yeah, I love doing this show, especially the spin-off series and revisiting and checking out some of these movies from the 90s for the first time. It's going to be a fun journey, and I'm glad that I'm continuing, and I'm here in season 2. So I've shown some commitment to it, so I know it's going to be a bumpy ride, and sometimes I won't get stuff in on time. Like, again, I'm late on this one. This was a March 1st release, so I'm already a couple of months behind. But again, we're celebrating 30 years of 1991 this year, so it's a year-round celebration. So I hope you've enjoyed this small conversation I've had on the movie, and not that you're going to learn anything from it, but again, these are just my thoughts and my perspective on the movie. And if you're ever wanting to come on the show and discuss a 90s movie or one that you think would be worth talking about, let me know, and I'll put you in on an episode. Again, this is always a podcast that's got an open invitation. I really won't say no to anyone unless you're going to be like an asshole or a piece of shit, but I would hope not. Other than that, my door's pretty much open for this show if you ever want to come on. So let me know. Message me, call me, text me, whatever. Facebook me, Twitter me, Instagram me. Is that even a thing? Instagram me? I don't know. or whatever, hit the DMs. And that's going to do it, and we'll see you next week for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, The Secret of the Ooze. God bless you guys.
There are things known and things unknown. And in between are the doors. An Oliver Stone film.
Try to run, try to hide. Bring on through to the other side. Bring on through to the other side.
Love it when you sing me.
The Doors, rated R. See it March 1st at theaters everywhere.